Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 328. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, I'm here with a first-timer. I've got Dr. Mike Israetel on the line. Mike, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. I plan to make this your least conceptual and least intelligent episode at the same time.
Thanks, I think. Well, people probably know you. Like you said earlier, people are probably used to seeing your big, gigantic head all over their YouTube and Instagram feeds. But in case people don't know the name, why don't you give yourself a quick intro? Tell people who you are and where they may know you from.
I am Mike. I have a PhD in sport physiology. I am a competitive bodybuilder. I just received my jiu-jitsu black belt from Josh Vogel at the Jiu-Jitsu Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that amazing city with flying cars and zero crime and no litter in the streets. And I am currently training just a bit of jiu-jitsu and mostly focusing on my hypertrophy and bodybuilding stuff, but I look into getting back into jiu-jitsu at some point much more heavily. And I've recently been giving a lot of thought to these topics, and I'm super pumped to chat about kind of a bit of a scientific approach to jiu-jitsu training that I have been fiendishly and secretly developing in my lab. I got nothing. That's it.
No worries, sir. Well, you know what? That's a little bit ominous, but hopefully this goes in the right direction here. What you had talked about was getting into a discussion about training intensity in jiu-jitsu. And I am fascinated to hear your take on this. You know, for those who have never seen you on YouTube, like you said, you're a competitive bodybuilder, you're a big boy. And so I would love to hear your thoughts, especially informed from a science background around how you look at training intensity in jiu-jitsu, just kind of going into that framework that you teased there a second ago.
Absolutely. And please feel free to cut me off at any point to ask follow-up questions or tell me to shut up or just tell me I'm wrong. And I would love pushback on any and all of this, by the way. I don't attach my ego to my intellectual pursuits. I used to attach my ego to my sexual performance. That was a mistake. Oh boy, let me tell you. All right. So the way I see training intensity in jiu-jitsu is in a spectrum. And every part of the spectrum has a very good use case for training in it. First, let's define what intensity means. Intensity can be defined in jiu-jitsu training as how much are you contracting your muscles during the rolls relative to your abilities. Muscle contraction can be scaled on at least two variables. Both will apply here. One is the speed of muscle contraction, the speed of muscle action, rapid movements, explosive movements, quick guard passes, jumping guard, super quickie, dippy takedowns. That is high intensity. And low intensity can literally be defined as a resultant of very slow movement where you're actually not trying to move quickly, but someone's stopping you, but you're literally just trying to move very slow through the movement. The second factor in intensity is revealed as how much force are you imparting on your opponent and how much force are you imparting to both work your system and advance your position or resist their various advances. And so, for example, if you are like me and you do slow, low, heavy, grinding guard passing, then as you pass, people push against you, they try to shrimp away, how much you're squeezing into them, you leveraging your body weight into them, and like very extensively pulling them into you as you pass can be scaled on a scale of you're rolling against the new 12-year-old white belt that showed up and weighs 60 pounds, and you're just literally going through the motions, all the way to you're in a competition and one pass gets you the advantage and wins you the whole tournament. and you're halfway past and it's just collars, grips, and just grinding your life away until he gives you the pass. And so speed and force are really the two variables there, and you can scale them on anywhere from, 0. These are actually objectively definable. 0 on speed means you don't move. Typically not what you do in jiu-jitsu, though unresisted drilling and letting someone drill on you technically is 0 speed intensity from some perspective, all the way to 100, which is your most rapid fire movement that you're capable of. And then 0 on the force production scale is like if you're pulling someone's leg and they move it out of the way with any amount of force, you lose the position. And 100 is like either your bicep tears off or you're getting the pass. One of those two things is going to happen. And so that's kind of the intensity spectrum. And then any questions about that spectrum before I talk about where on the spectrum we can have different kinds of training?
No, but I can maybe just chime in with my personal experience as well. I started jiu-jitsu, and like many people at the beginning, I was told, go slow, go slow. Very common advice for beginners, not because going slow is necessarily the best way to get results, but because when you're a beginner, it's the best way to get you to settle down and be productive and be safe and focus on learning. The challenge that happens, though, is as you get more advanced in the sport, you eventually realize that once your technique is there, once you know what you're doing, there are times when you actually need to speed things up. And I spent so many years focused on going slow that it kind of left a permanent imprint on my game. And even to this day, even though I know I don't have to do this anymore, I still have that white belt Steve in my head who it was beaten into him. Go slow, be controlled at all times. If you can't do it slow, then you can't do it fast. And as a result, I have a very slow, crushing, like glacial jiu-jitsu style, I think sort of similar to what you've described. And I'm very curious to get your thoughts onto whether these are inherently good or bad and how safety comes into play, especially at beginner levels. But I'll turn it over to you to continue your point.
Yes, that is excellent insight, and I would love to address some of those. So what we can do is try to go across the intensity spectrum, even if it's as simple as making two cuts into it, thus giving us 3 zones of intensity. One is the easiest zone. Some combination, though these can be bifurcated in a more advanced discussion, some combination of pretty slow and just not using a lot of force. Like how a purple belt 200-pound guy would roll with the blue belt 110-pound girl. Like if you see anything north of 30% effort, you're the black belt professor, you pull him aside after class and you're like, my man, we're not here to try to kill each other. Please understand what's going on. Some shit like that. And then there's the kind of middle zone, kind of the middle 33%, where it can be some combination of significantly faster, but with pretty light force execution, or significant force execution, not crazy, not your best, but pretty damn slow. And then the last zone of intensity can be the hardest one, the top 33%, some combination of very, very rapid movements and plenty of force, all the way to the slowest movement in the world, but only because the opponent is pushing back against you or won't give you the position with all his force. And the slowness is only as a result of you putting in very high levels of muscular force on your end. So now that we have these 3 categories, roughly, very roughly, and remember in each one of these, we can play with how we sort of fill up the space. Is it more with speed or more with strength, or an even combination of both, or both maxed out? And then once we figure that situation out, we can say, okay, for these big 3 categories of how to move in jiu-jitsu, what are use cases that we can fill in under them? So just imagine a sheet of paper in like Microsoft Word or something like that, or just even PowerPoint. And we have like just a line. The line at the very top goes 0 to 100, and that's intensity. And then we have 3 boxes that sit right next to each other under that line. They're the entire length of the line. Each one is a third the length. They're all crunched together. And, the box on the left is light intensity, then moderate intensity in the middle, and all the way to the right at the top is hard intensity. Below each box, we can write a list. One list for each box, one list below each box of here are the use cases in jiu-jitsu that really match this intensity well. And what we end up doing if we try that exercise is a really cool thing, because as you fill in the use cases, some of them will be like, dude, that's actually a really good use case. It makes total sense. It passes the sniff test, but doesn't seem to like relate to any grand architecture of how to figure out how to do jiu-jitsu. But a lot of these will end up having a lot of commonalities, and kind of this logic emerges from within this space of 3 different difficulties of training. and what goes well with them. So on the very left side under the light space, I'll just give a couple of examples because, like this podcast would last a lot longer and bore people even more to tears than no doubt they're already on their way to being if we just perseverated on a sort of an inclusive list or a very expanded list of all of these. But I'll give just a few examples and try to weave them together. A really good approach to light training, I can think of 2 cases for this right offhand. One is folks learning new things. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. You ever hear about that whole thing? This is the exact case for that. You're not going to learn a whole lot if you're on the hard box all the way to the right, because fight or flight engages. When you are in fight or flight, you actually have trouble learning as much. Relaxed posture lets your brain learn better. And at the same time, if you go too hard, you'll make mistakes because you're going faster than your movement world model in your head can accommodate. You're just kind of stabbing in the dark. But your movement world model, some combination of your primary sensory, primary motor cortices, and your cerebellum, they don't really know what's up and down or right or wrong. It's just about for you to teach them. And so if you move stochastically and jumpy and, psycho white belt energy when you're learning new moves, then you're going to learn them bad. You're going to learn them wrong because you can't slow down enough to actually follow proper trajectories. And so there's another problem there. If you're learning all the time, and your learning saps your energy and beats you up and exposes you to injury risk, and then also your live rolling also does that, well then Jesus Christ, you're just not going to last very long in the sport. Steve, you ever have a situation where you come up to a white belt in the gym who's losing it for the 5th day in a row, and you're like, hey man, I know this is exciting. However, if we slow down and chill just a little bit, you'll get more out of this and you won't just break your arm in 2 weeks.
Yes, 100%, 100%. In fact, advice I often give to beginners, white belts, and even some blue belts is learn to become aware of when you're being tense. I've observed that with beginners, they often tense up without even realizing that they're doing it. Just because, again, for people who are not quite comfortable with jiu-jitsu because they're just getting started, it's Fight Club for them, right? The fight or flight response kicks into play and they're in here to scrap. Whether they realize it or not, their body just goes into fight mode. And as a black belt, right, you know this, you can feel that in a beginner. You can feel when they're too tense. And it also makes it easy to exploit them because the tenser they are, the more rigid their body structure is. There is a time and a place to tense and to squeeze. But if you're always tense and always squeezing, you're not really using that strength effectively. So I always tell beginners, if you can't self-regulate because you don't know how yet, leverage your training partner. Get them to tell you, hey, I've noticed you're just way too tense, tone it down a bit. And then after a while of doing that, you can train in that looseness. But yes, I've absolutely observed that before.
Yes. Yeah. For jiu-jitsu guys who are tense, there are actually many ways you could exploit that as someone who knows more things. One, as you mentioned, is rigidity, and then you can sweep them easier. You can take them down easier. The other one is you just realize they're tense. You hold your position with minimum required tension on your part, mostly via positioning and gravity alignment, and you just cook them until, well, really, you don't cook them. They cook themselves. And at some point, you feel their tension fading and they start gassing, and you're like, now I can apply 5% more tension and get an easy pass because this dude just fried himself. So there are 10 trillion different reasons why it's a bad idea. But in any case, that learning mindset for jiu-jitsu and even in other cases for folks learning is a very, very good thing. The other way that this works is for fatigue management and at the same time for the reinforcement of proper movement patterns. Every single person, I don't care if you're the best jiu-jitsu player in the world, can always refine their core movements, even the ones they know well. And the best way to refine them is to go back to first principles, back to basics, back to doing the move slow, and seeing if you can examine, why am I moving exactly in this direction? This is one of the excellent use cases for what's currently called a quote-unquote ecological approach in jiu-jitsu, where you sort of explore the vector space in a position and see I typically move like this. What if I moved a little to the left or to the right? Would that make the pass easier or harder? Now, that's something you can really do well at speed and at great intensity, but at slow speed and slow intensity, you can really, really figure out a lot of stuff. And so the fatigue management component's also big because anyone who trains jiu-jitsu for real knows one fundamental thing. Maybe they don't know this. Now they're going to know this. Your body's physical abilities to do hard rolls are vastly smaller than your brain and nervous system's abilities to adapt from movement training. And because of that, you only have so many hard rolls in you per week, but you have way more rolls in you per week that if they are light, still reinforce and teach and rewire and improve those motor patterns. the same motor patterns that when you learn to crank up the intensity later, you will just be smoother at every single intensity with. So for folks, there's many ways to do this. One is you tell yourself, I'm going to do hard rolls until my body is beat up, and then I'm going to take a couple of days or a couple of sessions of just light rolls and cap my intensity at like 33%. And then you can also do it in a more programmed, periodized style. You can take every other roll as a light roll, every other roll as a hard roll. There are many, many ways to slice it. So these are some of the really awesome benefits of rolling light.
So something that happens a lot, I mean, you've seen the meme, right? Two guys say, hey, do you want to roll light? And they slap and they bump, and then they just beat the shit out of each other. There's something about jiu-jitsu where we just gravitate towards escalation and escalating the intensity, especially at beginner levels. It's very hard to turn that off. Do you have any suggestions for people in that situation who are maybe beginners and they struggle with that natural instinct to escalate? Because that can work against you, not just in terms of your training goals, but strategically. If you get sucked into a game of trying to go fast when the other person is better at that style than you are, you're playing into their game and it's going to work against you, not even getting into risk of injury, less effective learning. Do you have any thoughts on how you can better self-regulate to kind of get yourself into that target zone that you want to be in?
Yes. I have at least one thought, possibly a few. So it's good to go back and examine why you're upregulating as they upregulate. There's really only one answer. It's ego. That's just it. Like, you just want to win, which is dope. You can feel free to pat yourself on the back. But when you realize that your ego doesn't match your long-term training objectives, and thus it doesn't even match itself in the future because you want to be a black belt killer eventually, you don't want to be like a purple belt with 5 different fucking casts on at the same time, then it behooves you to think this through and go, okay, that's dumb. I'm not going to do it. If you never admit to yourself that it's egotistical, you can get, some new blue belts pushing you, and you gotta put the hammer down. The other way, that's a kind of a negative way to look at it. Not negative in a bad way, but moving away from the ego. There is something to move towards. And for absolutely lack of a better word, I'm going to put it, here's the definition today, folks, here for the first time. Move towards slickness. You ever see someone like the old 55 like coral belt rolling with like a 20-year-old brown belt, and the brown belt's getting after it? He's like, one weapon is strength and health and youth and speed, and I'm going to use it. And it seems like he's barely even trying, and the elder coral belt gets a sweep. You're like, what? Like, he just basically trapped everything he needed to and just slowly leaned his body to the right. And at the last minute, the young brown belt realizes all of his posts are gone. He can't post. He's just getting swept. There's something so goddamn magical to that. And that is actually the very core of jiu-jitsu, because you can always dial up your speed and dial it down. You can always dial up your strength and dial it down. You can't dial up and down your technique because you only know so much technique. And so technique is the thing that makes you slick. And so when you're rolling, let's say you are a purple belt and you're rolling against a relatively new blue belt, roughly your size, pretty aggressive dude, he's going to come for it. Like, duh, of course he's going to come for it. You're going to tell yourself a different goal in your head. You're going to say, my job in this role is to cap my effort at like a third of what it normally is. And I know what that feels like. And I don't give a flying fuck how many points this guy scores on me or how much tapping I do to him. But what I'm going to shoot for is I'm going to shoot to execute my shit, but I'm going to shoot it with almost no intensity. And thus, anytime I get what I want, it's going to be on ball or slick technique. If you can train with everyone with slickness as front of mind, then eventually when the guy comes in on a Friday and you're all nice and healed up and, like on Wednesday you rolled with him and he actually, like, he subbed you twice, but you only got a couple really slick sweeps on him. He thinks he's better than you. He told his friends, like, they were like, how's jiu-jitsu going? And he's like, oh man, I'm subbing like pretty competitive purple belt. He was pretty good. He comes Friday, and that's actually when you turn up the realness on him. Then you go like at the low end of hard. You're practicing slickness, so you're slick, but now your slickness is augmented by much more speed and much more strength. And then you shut him out completely scoreless and sub him 5 times in 2 rolls. And obviously he's going to leave them at like, whoa, okay, I misconstrued my totem pole hierarchy position here. You're going to benefit greatly because you weren't beating the shit out of yourself. You took the ego out of the equation and you just said, I'm going to only do slick shit. I have a way, like if I train with like girls or something like that, and they're much lighter, much weaker, lower belt rank, what I'll do is tell myself, Israetel, you are going to get 0 points unless you're using a child's level of strength to execute them. And your goal is to sequence together your moves like with as much slickness as possible and timing as possible. And here's the thing, if you're not worried about effort, if you're not worried about winning, you can be patient in guard, for example, and get the timing just right. You know, like if you're doing like a deep half game in gi and you pull out one of the lapels and you like just hold it for a while. And they're like, that seems like he's not doing anything with that. And then like, you know, you get in a deep half and you kind of weave the lapel around and they're like, okay, no danger yet. And all of a sudden you've crossed the lapel under their legs and they're just falling and they have nothing to say about it because they're like, oh shit, he took my post away from me. That is a real good way to still have a positive mission on your hand and not just being able to be in a place where like, okay, I can't train hard. I can't go hard. I don't have an ego, but like, what the fuck am I even rolling for? Like, am I just a training dummy? No. You still want to beat on slickness. And look, if it's a killer UFC black belt guy, you could be as slick as you want. They're only 33%. He's just going to stomp on you. No big deal. At least you didn't get hurt. But if you are rolling against people that are not as proficient, then you had better be beating them on damn near slickness and nothing else, because that's the thing you really want to train the most.
Yeah, very well said. It's interesting too, because as you get more experience, this becomes easier to do and to kind of put these handicaps on yourself, these constraints on yourself when you're training. When I started off, like many people, my objective in the gym was to win. I went in there and I wanted to get the tap. Of course, the older and the more experienced I get, the more I realize that really isn't the best way to effectively train, to try to seek taps in the gym. In fact, these days, I rarely tap anybody in the gym at all because my interest is more in effortless positional control. I want to be able to do something not just effectively, but also easily. I don't want to have to kill myself to make a technique happen. And it takes a lot of restraint to do that because, like you said, when you start practicing with turning the intensity down or removing elements from your game, what's going to happen at the beginning is you're going to get your ass kicked. You're going to lose a lot because you've taken out the things that were propping up your jiu-jitsu. And that forces you to then find another way. At the moment, I have a shoulder injury at the moment. I'm just waiting to get surgery on it. And it's my right arm, my dominant arm. It's frustrating. There's a lot of stuff I cannot do. And I didn't realize beforehand how much of jiu-jitsu requires you to really be mobile in your shoulder. So a lot of things that I used to do without thinking about, like going for collar grips or connecting and squeezing my arms, I've got to be more careful and deliberate about that. And of course, when you take those things out of your game, then yeah, you're giving up weapons and you are going to struggle. There will be that blue belt who runs around you 100 times, then brags about how he beat up the old black belt or whatever. But eventually you start to work on other areas of your game that you never had a chance to before. As an example, previously, I was never really a supine guard guy. I don't like laying on my back and letting my opponent be the first mover and try to, just enter the guard in the way they want. I like to be seated. But the thing is, because of my arm, a lot of stuff that I would normally do, like collar drags, are kind of out and gi grips are kind of out. So I've had to create a more no-gi based supine guard that I can play. And this is a skill set I never would have focused on in the past if not for this injury. So when I hear people talk about things like, there's upside to injury, for a long time I thought, how can that be? But it does force you to go outside of your comfort zone and to turn the intensity down and to try new things. And if you can figure out how to bring about that mindset in yourself without having to get injured, that's awesome, right? That's such a big part of jiu-jitsu, is making sure that you stick to your game plan in the role and don't get flustered or pulled into your opponent's game. And so that means learning to keep your composure. That's very hard to do, to keep going slow, especially when you're losing, to have your opponent run around you and speed past your guard, and to know that if you were to turn up the intensity, you could match that and beat that, but to also understand that's not going to serve my training. So I'm going to let this person have that win today because I need to be focusing on something else.
Absolutely. There's so much more to say there. That's some examples of good candidate ways to approach easy training. Next up is moderate intensity. Moderate intensity is good for a ton of stuff and may really be the default way that you train after blue belt. Because moderate intensity can occupy two different spaces. Really four if you think about it, and really it's a spectrum, so it's not four, but let me make this clear. You can roll with some decent oomph and strength, but make your positioning deliberately slower so that you hit the right positions. However, what you want to do is hit the right positions and go slower so that you hit the right positions and so that you avoid outpacing your opponent. Because if you get the drop on someone, let's say you hit like a super quick arm drag single on someone, just boom, and they're down. if you won the position. Congratulations. But you might have gone so quick that you don't even know what it would be like to match resistance if they caught you in the act and defended. You have no exploration of the vector space of their defending that, because you just beat them to it real quick. Like, imagine if you were doing jiu-jitsu against the Flash. He actually wouldn't need to do any jiu-jitsu against you at all. He wouldn't need to know anything, because he could like zip to your back and choke you out. And you were like, what the fuck? So if you go really fast, that's awesome for reasons I'm going to mention in a second. But sometimes working slow positions, using a little bit more strength, and then as you're working through their defense, you can modulate your strength and your positioning up and down to find your groove. And then you slowly find the passing pattern or the sweeping pattern or the back take pattern that meets the least resistance and is the slickest, but you're aware of it and you're moving slow enough to really work that groove. And you can always make it faster later. The other way, the other end of the extreme to roll into moderate rolling is to cool it on the effort, on the strength that you're using. You're still using some strength. It's not an easy roll, but I would say that similar strength to the top end of easy, like a third of your strength or something, which is like, there's some business in there. You can do some stuff, but you are going pretty damn fast, slick fast. And that is when you already know your trajectory well. It's a well-grooved move, and now you need to prepare that well-grooved move that's pretty good slow to quicker. And the best way through this, if you were telling a robot how to train jiu-jitsu, would start, a macro cycle of jiu-jitsu where you're working on a specific sequence of moves and positions, moving pretty slow for everything. And then over time, you just increase the speed in your moderate rolls. Towards the end of, let's say, a 3-month period, you're doing all these moves pretty damn fast, but maybe without a ton of strength. And that teaches you something critical. One is it's insanely specific to the actual competition roles that matter, because if you're going to be moving fast in competition, you had better learn how to move at speed. One real terrible thing to get yourself into is to just be like the Roger Gracie of technique work and drilling, and then think that somehow magically transfers instantly into live rolls. Steve, I'm sure you've competed and been around enough competitors, first-time competitors, where they get into their first competition roll or first few, and they're like, dude, holy shit, the opponents are trying really hard. And it's not like a cooperative role anymore. And I can't take my time. Like, I got to get from point A to point B because they're trying to defend at every state. You know what I mean by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the gym, even when you're training relatively hard with people, it's still not a fight. And there's always going to be part of you that knows that, even if your body's going into fight or flight. I mean, at the end of the day, you're still in the gym training with people that you probably know. When you compete, all rules are off except for the actual rules themselves. So things that you would never do in the gym because you care about your training partners, those gentlemen's agreements are removed. There's a level of nastiness that you need in competition. You might need to grind your gi across the person's face and, try to catch their nose and move their head to the side. These are things you would never do to your friends in the gym. But that plus the adrenaline dump of going out into competition, I think is a very eye-opening experience for a lot of people, which is honestly one of the main reasons why people always encourage grapplers to try competition, because it gives you that kind of stress inoculation. Even if you have no intent of ever being a competitor, it can still be an interesting experience because it is so different from training in the gym.
Yes, 100%. And so moderate training really will occupy a huge fraction of your training because it allows you to take the slow and easy training that's kind of foundational to grooving in the movement patterns you want to know. And once they're grooved in enough for you to pull it off with some strength and some speed, where the strength no longer deteriorates the pattern and the speed is something that you can scale up to and doesn't deteriorate the pattern, then this is where a lot of productive training happens. So that's the kind of the middle. And then the top end of the hard is like the downside is that it beats the living shit out of you, exponentially increases your injury risk, exponentially increases your fatigue, both systemic fatigue of just, like after a week of hard jiu-jitsu, your girl's like, what do you want to do tonight? You're like, I was just thinking of sitting here and staring at a wall, but whatever you want to like wheel me to, I'll be there while you do anything else. That, if you roll hard, is going to be a thing. If you don't roll hard a lot, then you're just going to be able to roll more and learn more, and your nervous system is going to improve because you're not getting beat to shit all the time. So there are distinct downsides. Obviously, joint connective tissue stuff, I don't need to say anymore. I think anyone who's ever done jiu-jitsu realizes hard rolls beat you up in a way that that only hard rolls can beat you up. However, I've seen some schools and some philosophies and some folks whom I have infinite respect for, just a polite tactical disagreement, really poo-poo the idea of hard rolling and training. There is a balance to this, because I'll tell you this, for all of its downsides, rolling in the top third of the intensity spectrum is the most specific thing you could be doing to get better for winning at jiu-jitsu. And if you have competitive aspirations or you just want to be damn good, you have to dip your toe into that pool regularly, because there's only one way to tell apart pretend jiu-jitsu, that you could definitely pretend jiu-jitsu in light rolling. You can pretend quite a bit of it in moderate rolling. You will be discovered for how good you actually are when you can roll hard, and only when you can roll hard. And not only is it insanely specific, the training for hard rolling, which is some combination of real quick, real tough with muscle, and anything in between, or in competition, both at the same time. When you're training like that, you are refining your moves from moves that are essentially hypothetical, because everyone's to some extent either cooperating, or if you're good enough to pull off these moves, moderate intensity, they may not actually work out for you in real life. And so when you are learning how to express these moves at speed and at high levels of strength with high levels of resistance, then you're actually making the moves organic to the thing you want them to have. For example, if you work on single legs, arm drag single entry, and let's say it's like grabbing around the knee single leg, you can train it light and moderate with training partners, and it feels slick. It's good. You're getting it all the time. When you go hard and they go hard, what you might realize is that when I grab their knee, even though I've cleared their arm, I'm on the side of their body, I'm down to one knee, I've grabbed around their knee to try to stand up, posture, and push them down, they're extending their glute and their hip and their knee away from me, and I can't pick up their leg. What the fuck? And so if I never go hard and get training in that vector space of what if we're in the same positions, but I have to learn how to pull hard from this position and really close my clasp around it, you will be shocked. And earlier we were talking about kind of the shock of competition. That's one of them. It's like, give me your leg. And they're like, no, fuck you. And you're like, what the hell? But I usually get this. It isn't so much, it's definitely a psychological thing, but it's also a technical thing. It's a neural learning thing. You've never had to express your abilities in that intensity and speed level with that much resistance. So hard rolls have a special place, an indispensable place in training, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Everything else you do in training is just practice for hard rolls. And the hard rolls are the thing that both make you really good in the real world, and also they're the thing that tell you how good you really are. And here's another thing. Obviously these, you can see how we can fill in all the blanks between the boxes here and give 90 different reasons why these are good. One more reason with hard rolls is it really separates the moves you thought you were good at from the ones that you're actually good at. And it will tell you all kinds of things about which of my passes actually works when I'm going hard and so is the other person. Which of my sweeps actually works with the highest percentage. Because there are guys, and God, I don't want to get too ranty about this, the traditional seminar format.
Don't get me started on the traditional seminar format.
Right. I think everyone's kind of waking up to this. Now, here's the thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going to see a world champ that's showing you a couple moves in clever positions. You might take away something that you practice and practice and practice. It becomes yours. And then you're like, dude, I'm so fucking glad I learned that. Absolute value there. However, if you over-index, it's not really the problem of maybe even how seminars are taught. It's the problem of what people think they're going to get out of the seminar without even trying. What they do is they just end up working real technical leg lock entries for an hour. And then they're like, hey, this is cool. And then they try it in easy rolling later and they're like, it fucking works, bro. They try it in moderate and they're like, oh my God, I got a couple of guys. Yes. They try it in hard and they're scoreless. You're like, I'm just going to pull my knee out, cross the knee line. Fuck you. Nope. And you're like, oh my God, it turns out I just know how to do this position because I saw a dude teach it to me for an hour. I need either way more training on the specifics hard to see where the falling apart occurs, or I need to just realize I don't know this move. And if it's outside of my wheelhouse and I have no transitional positions that take my game to that move anyway, there's not really a reason for I can't know all the moves. And just because I'm ranting on this real quick, this is something I'll be saying in lots of podcasts in the future. The total latent vector space, yes, that's a very fancy way of saying it. I'm probably getting all the terms wrong. The total potential moves that you could do against an opponent in jiu-jitsu are not infinite, but they're in the quadrillions. Your brain can't remember them all. It's impossible. So what you have to do is select a game, a series of feet to floor and then floor to pass, and then pass to submission. And there are many other ways to do it. One of those games, offense and defense, and practice very similar things often till you groove in a pattern that's yours, that you're really good at. You can't get good at everything else. And how do you know if you're like, well, okay, I have like 3 branches off this game. I know I really can only get good at like 2. Which branch do I prune? Steve, the absolute best way, and really only way to know which branch you prune is you're pretty good at all the branches. Which one of these just does not go nearly as far in hard live rolls? Because if you have a branch you really love, but it's decaying in hard live rolls, like you're like, no, I'm getting shut down. You absolutely can dedicate yourself to working around it. But you may find that like, dude, one of my passes, bro, I get the shit on like people who like medaled at Worlds. One of my other passes, which I love and it's so slick and I want to do it, it just gets shut down every time. And I've been working on it for 6 months. And I've talked to Josh Vogel and he worked with me on it and he really picked it apart. For 2 months afterwards, I like really trained it and I still basically getting nowhere. What you're discovering is that some combination of, first, your body proportions and your relative strengths and weaknesses, your ability to go at speed and whatever else, and the true constraints of the physics of jiu-jitsu are just waving the finger at you and they're like, nah, family, this shit is not going to work for you, bro. This is a pretend move that you're just better taking to a McDojo and charging people $900 an hour to see. And they're like, whoa, that's so cool. But this is not going to work for you. So you better prune that branch now, unless you just want to spend the rest of your life doing some shit that like, listen, you're the world's slickest blue belt beater, but a brown belt comes in and all of a sudden you got nothing. So live rolls are indispensable for that. And one last thing before I finish this live rolling rant. Live is the kind of heuristic term for that top 33% of intensity. One thing is you said something earlier, which is super true. You don't want to beat the shit out of and injure your training partners. Facts. So competition rolls are still and forever will be special. However, if you have a competitor that is trying to become their best at competition and they're in your gym, let's say it's not you, sometimes these guys on occasion strategically, okay, look, they need a lot of easy rolls, they need a ton of moderate rolls, they need tons of hard rolls, but they need rolls every now and again, maybe leading up to competition, there's a few ways to do this, that are rolls where it is your job as their training partner to leave them scoreless, or it's your job as a training partner to use your tip of the spear best weapon with some goddamn gusto to put it up their ass so they can feel what it's like when no one's cooperating. It's not even just a hard roll. It's a hard roll and I'm intentionally being a dick. Not in a way that's going to get you hurt, but in a way that's going to get you a look that's somewhere between top end of typical hard roll and competition roll. Maybe even if it's halfway through. Like for example, if I went to go train twice, I guess, so far at the B team in Austin, Texas, some of the best jiu-jitsu players in the world. Of course, I left with my rectum separated from my body. They put in a nice package for me and sent me away. I was very kind of those guys. But when those guys get ready for tournaments, they need people to push them at above typical roll intensity. Now, if you do that all the time, you're going to be Mr. Potato Head, you're going to fall apart. But a few rolls here and there, the Wednesday before a Saturday competition, can give them that look that they need to, at the very least, psychologically prepare them for what the fuck's about to happen. And at the very best, actually give them a really good technical look that they have to solve a problem they haven't experienced before. A quick sample. One of my jiu-jitsu coach locally, and he's working in cooperation with Josh Vogel, is Will Starks, pro MMA, winning record, just a different role, right? He's just really good at combat. And he asked me for a look recently of giving him some heavy pressure and really sort of pushing him into the cage and just shutting down his game. Now, Will weighs like 175, 170. He fights at like 155. I weigh 230. I've taken a lot of steroids over the years. I'm Russian. That probably helps some way. And what I did to him was I just ground my forehead into every single part of his body, including under his chin. I pulled him down consistently. I pushed him into walls. I didn't let him get up. Now, can Will beat me in jiu-jitsu in an open tournament? Yeah, God, yeah. But did that roll, if people walked in and watched me do that with him, they'd have been like, are those guys upset at each other or what the hell is going on? Now, Will is always cool, calm, collected, but it was the first time in a long time he was left breathing heavy. I'm not patting myself on the back. Will could kill me anytime he wants, but he needs that kind of look that's a little bit beyond typical hard roll, annoying nuisance roll, because he has to solve that problem. And we did 3 rolls in a row. He solved the problem at the end, but the first 2 rolls, I got his ass. And if he never got that look, he could walk into a tournament being, I got a hard roll, and then lock up with some dude who just comes in heavy, annoying and sticky and heavy. And that sucks. And you're like, damn it, no one ever gives me this. So if you give someone that real top end every now and again, per their request, of course, I would never give these rolls to people unless they asked for it. then in a controlled setting, it can give a good look.
Yeah, very, very well said. And it touches on something that we don't talk enough about in this sport, which is that there are different ways to apply a technique. The context matters. When you are training in the gym with your buddies and you're intentionally dialing down the intensity and you're being flowy, kind of like you said, you're being slick, there's a different dynamic that happens. And it's beyond just the psychological, strategic side of things, but the jiu-jitsu itself is different. If my training partner is being slow and deliberate with what they're doing, and they're kind of letting me work because we're friends in the gym, what winds up happening is they're probably going to be in a position where they've got really good base. They're kind of solidly positioned. They're not out of position that much because they're not moving that much. And so for me, attacking someone like that, I've got to start finding openings. I've got to find a way to pull their arm free from the rest of their body to start off balancing them or get access to their leg. But once you start speeding things up, and there's really an aggressive intent to win, now speed and momentum come into play, which is a completely different dynamic of jiu-jitsu. And in fact, a lot of the time, things like capitalizing on a mistake that the other person can make, that can be harder if they're going fast, right? If someone is going slow and deliberate, it's pretty easy for me to just, if they give me their leg, I can just grab it and take it. But if they're really turning up the heat, even if they make mistakes, if they're fast enough about it, it might be hard for me to make them pay for it if I'm still trying to go slow. So it gives you a completely different style of jiu-jitsu. And I think that when we're training, we talk all the time about putting constraints on ourselves and how to get the best out of our individual training. I think talking about how to customize our opponent's behavior or our training partner's behavior is just as important. If you are used to rolling with, again, like slow or more controlled people, and then all of a sudden you get some gymnast in there who's trying to backflip over your guard, you will find that the way you've been doing techniques may not work against those people because you were making the assumption that they were going to be sitting mostly still while you did your jiu-jitsu. So I think that there has to be this dialogue with your training partner about here's what I need to work on today. And as you mentioned, that goes well beyond competitors. I myself don't compete, but I always like to have some of those roles where I tell people, just try to break me, try to do whatever you would do. And part of my job is to build that resilience and to find openings, even against an opponent who's giving me everything they've got. It's a very different application of technique. And what you might find is the way that you would do a technique might change in that circumstance. It's not always the same as the way that you would play it against a slower, pressure control-based opponent.
Yes. And that's another sort of feather in the hat of the quote-unquote ecological approach is they've understood that the kind of latent vector space, the potential ways you can move, even in the same movement, even in the same sweep or the same pass, there's a topography there. There is a range there. It can be a big range depending on how quickly they're moving, how they're responding, how much force they input, how much force you're doing. And if you get all sorts of different looks, then it's great for you because ultimately it enriches that model you have, the three-dimensional movement space. And if you have a very rich model in your head, then you can pretty much feel comfortable everywhere and find your way everywhere. It's like what good visual data makes the Tesla self-driving program better, all of it. Because if a car gets really good at driving during snow or during rain, it's going to get so much better driving at those and also better at driving during sunshine because now it has elucidated ways of detecting things in the road that are so efficient and so effective, ways that only snow and rain would have surfaced, that now it can reduce its processing for the visual system's obvious things during sunny days and potentially extend its view into further obstacles and further vehicles that normally it would have to spend a lot of processing just driving through a sunny day. And so in much the same way, if you train jiu-jitsu and never really push the pace, not only do you ever find out if your shit really works or not at the end of the day, but also when you do such hard training and you're asked to go against different opponents, running different games, moving at different speeds, insofar as you can take your basic movements and expand them into successes in that different landscape, which over time, of course, you will. And the more looks you get, first they're just going to catch you with it all the time. Then it's kind of 50-50. And then you start winning a little bit more. And then you start to become dominant in that space. Then it just makes you better all around. Like, Gordon Ryan, where are you going to put Gordon Ryan that you're going to really exploit him? Like, well, let's see. At EBI, he used to start with having someone take his back or armbar and then still get out of it. holy shit, this is a big, big problem. But I guarantee you he doesn't duck people in training, because if Gordon Ryan wants to save his body, he's just going to go slick with you. And I'm sure in training people have like swept him. I'm sure they've passed him, and maybe not him literally, but other people. And like, I was rolling with Nicky Ryan, right? I rolled with Nicky at B team, and like him and I got locked into a position, and which is kind of like slow movements from there. I know for a fact that Nicky Ryan could pass at will and just smush me and just take everything from me at the same time. But he was playing a patient, calm game, just exploring this new space, because my body shaped all weird. It's kind of a new challenge. And he wasn't like, oh, I got to win at all costs. And, there were opportunities where I could have gotten a dominant position, and I got close to it. And that's to his credit, because he has an open-ended mindset and isn't just trying to psychotically do something fast that he doesn't even know what it is. It's all about using every part of that training spectrum, easy and moderate and hard and very, very hard, getting comfortable at each one of those. And then you really, really, really start to get some good jiu-jitsu. And the overall plan for how this works at any time scale, it could be within a week, often it's within a month. It's between tournament cycles, definitely within each belt rank. And sort of to some extent over the career, is you spend the most time in the easiest intensity in beginning of training phase. When you have an agglomeration of moves, maybe it's your moves you're learning for the first time, they're new to you, or you're refining them, and you really, really need to slow down, or if it's not so slow, you need to go real light with your strength. And then as you progress within a training cycle before a tournament, or through your career, you're going to do more and more moderate rolls, really the business end. That's where most of the magic happens. You already have techniques you can work, and you're working them at speed and with some strength. That's when that kind of synthesis of how to move and the actual movement occurs. That's great. It's indispensable. And then later, closer to a tournament, for example, or when you're more of a black belt and more competitive, then you start to roll more often in the hard space, because that's the one that gives you already know your game really well. And there's always time to come back and go slower and use less force, but you spend quite a few rolls going super, super hard, because that really is like the most specific thing that you could be training for at that time. And that periodization of jiu-jitsu, from including more easier rolls and then more moderate rolls and then harder rolls, is I found very, very helpful. And it doesn't mean all or none. You might do half of your rolls as easy. You might do 30% of your rolls as moderate and 20% hard when you're like a white belt or when you're just at the beginning of tournament prep. Then later in the middle, you might do 50% of your rolls at moderate. You might do something like 20% of your rolls at easy, or maybe 25% at easy and 25% at hard. And then when you are in, several weeks before a tournament, before your taper, or you're a pretty healthy, young, competitive black belt, you might actually do, like, technically speaking, 50% of your rolls at hard, which if you've ever been to B team, like, that's how that works for the pros. And then maybe 30% of your rolls are moderate and only 20% are light, where you're just kind of cleaning up some quirks. Like when the jiu-jitsu pros stay after class to try to like thread an escape or something like that, they're just playing around. That kind of intensity might be more or less the most you do on that light range. So there's that progression. Now, the last thing I'll say, Steve, before I cut myself off is, how does this work in the real world? Well, like every white belt wants every roll to be 100% only the hard intensity. And a lot of black belts get nice and beat up and they're like, I'll just do the easy rolls. To be your very best at the sport, just consider the fact that there is that progression and there's always time to turn it up. And if you turn it up for a few sessions or a few weeks, it's totally fine to turn it back down, to recover, to adapt, to relearn and hyper refocus your techniques, and then start the wave back up into harder and harder average rolls.
So here's a question maybe for the less experienced people out there. How do you do that when you're a beginner? Because as a senior belt, I feel pretty good about my ability to regulate my intensity. If I want to go into class and focus on a specific area or roll at a certain intensity, I know how to do that. But for someone who's just starting this out and maybe they're trying to develop that skill set and they don't yet have the nuance to know that there are these different ways to roll, or even how to get themselves into the right zone where they're doing it, how do you kind of teach a blue belter, for example, when it's time to pick a higher intensity roll, and how to do that without increasing the risk of injury to themselves and their training partner?
I mean, good coaching would mean that when folks join, and this is something I thought worked really well at a place in Philly I trained for a long time called Balance. and the jiu-jitsu company in Philly currently does this exceptionally well. They actually just have like a totally separate beginner curriculum. I believe it's like something like 3 to 6 months, white belts only. Oh, by the way, at any belt rink, you can always come back and do it. No problem. But really, white belts are the ones that have to do it if you're going to join the school and if you've never rolled before. And what they do is mostly focus at first on only the light side of the spectrum, and then maybe towards the end a bit of light and moderate. And maybe just for fun, every Friday, after 3 months, let the guys and gals beat the shit out of each other and go hard. Because, just there's something to be said for vibes and for enjoyment. Like if we were all robots, we'd be way better at jiu-jitsu, but maybe, we don't get that Viking sword drawing feeling as much as we'd like. And so from that perspective, having a completely isolated beginners program solves many of those problems. And in that beginners program, not only do you learn the techniques at a slow pace, but the slow pace is also reinforced. Like the instructor will come up to you and be like, hey, Jim, take it easy, buddy. We're just drilling, okay? And then you really kind of learn what that means. And also good instructors, and Josh Vogel is an excellent representation of this, will just actually tell you the logic of what's going on. Like, hey, listen, guys, we learn best when we start slow. And if you want to become a killer, we got to eventually get there. A group of people that do this really well is traditional folk style and freestyle wrestling development for youth athletes in the United States. When young kids start wrestling, they drill all the time. And they actually just keep drilling, which is really sweet all the way through. But there aren't very many good wrestling coaches that just let 2 6-year-olds bash heads for 6 minutes straight. Doesn't happen very often because they're not learning anything. Now, they need that look every now and again, but especially for beginners, nothing in this world can replace excellent coaching and continual reinforcement of the fact that, hey, there is a time and a place. And that goes both ways. Often for young males, it goes into the direction of, hey, chill the fuck out. For females, it often goes in the direction of, hey, Liz, this sweep is looking real slick. Let's put some oomph into it now, girl. You got this. Because a lot of girls will end up kind of sort of settling into an agreed cooperative role with other females, we'll just both flow and everyone just flows. Flowing is dope, but you're going to wake the fuck up at a tournament real soon if you just flow all the time. So there's both sides of the coin. And as far as individually, how can you tell? Look, Steve, you make an excellent point when you say how the hell do they know what this means? You don't. And so you're going to screw up and that's okay. And then when you've gone too hard, you're going to get real tired. You're going to realize, I should have gone easier. And then maybe next time you won't do it because you're too egotistical. But on time number 51, you'll finally get the memo and you'll start doing it better. By the way, I might not have done this well until I was a brown belt or something. It's arguable I still don't do this well. We're all flawed. And just keeping that understanding front of mind and reminding yourself on occasion, hey, slowing down is good or using less strength is good. That's real helpful. The other thing that's super helpful is it's real tough as a beginner white belt knowing basically nothing to say, okay, just don't try to throw hard, but then everyone pushes your shit in and just everyone beats you up. You're I lose every single roll that I ever do. I've never scored a single point. It's been 6 months. That's tough. As you get better and you get the new white belts in and they're smaller and weaker than you realize oh, I can beat the shit out of someone. And that's when you go, okay, I could just toast this person. And for a few months, once you start beating up the new shittier guy at the gym, it's fun. It's good for him, good for you. As long as it's all well-spirited, it's fun. But eventually, as a blue belt, you're going to be okay. So I'm not learning a lot from beating up this person. I'm learning some, but I think what I'm going to do is challenge myself to not use as much strength and really see if I can get them on just pure slickness. And I got to tell you, once you understand what slickness is, and everyone intuitively understands that it's beyond a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, feels so damn good to do. Because especially me, I'm all big and strong and juiced out of my mind or whatever. If I heavy stack past someone using strength, I don't feel good about it because okay, great, I'm strong. Great. I already knew that. But if I can slick someone into a position, oh boy, do I feel like Gordon Ryan reborn. And that's an awesome feeling you want to encourage in yourself. So as you become better than other folks around you, feel free to dial it back, at least with them. Eventually you'll be mature enough to dial it back with everyone and just take the losing. But losing isn't a 1 or 0 game. This is the last thing I'll say in this rant. There are different ways to lose. At first, you get submitted 6 times in 6 minutes. Probably the worst way to lose. The next is you get submitted less frequently, but you're getting points scored on you. If there was a point score, it would be 30-2 or something, 30-0. The next phase is they're actually not really submitting you much anymore. Maybe a 1 sub here or there, but they're beating the shit out of you on points. The next phase, as you get better, is they end up beating you on points, but it's not close, but you got something and you're not hardly ever getting submitted anymore. Later, you're 50-50 on points. Now that's a different scenario. And then later you start winning on points. And then later you start subbing them, and later you start dominating on points and subbing a bunch. And then later, let's say like with just for any reference belt that you're talking about, obviously everyone's getting better at the same time to an extent, right? So just on any given kind of ability set of a person, eventually you get so good that you're just like, you're the person doing 6 submissions unopposed, 0 points for them. If people were counting points, 32 points for you, 0 for them, 6 submissions every round. That spectrum that I just described, you can, when you dial your intensity down on any given ability level, you just slide back down the spectrum. You turn your intensity up, you slide back up the spectrum. If you have dropped your ego off at the door, which, like 5 grams of mushrooms and some furry, funny, stuffed animals in a room with a sitter can get you to drop your ego off no problem in about 6 hours, unless you go insane, no big deal. And then once you're done with your ego, what you can do is, whenever you slap hands with someone and you're rolling with them, you tell yourself, I am rolling at 25% and that is the end of it. And I will not turn it up no matter what happens. And then you see where on that spectrum you fall. Could be they're a killer and you get subbed 6 times. No big deal. They were going to fuck you up anyway. Okay, so you would have resisted. They would have just won on points. Great, slow clap. Again, in the gym, no one cares. That's a huge thing to realize. No one gives a shit. And if they do, they're wrong. They're fucking weird. It's not your problem. And then you might get to a point where like typically blue belts would smash you and get a bunch of subs. But now even in your 25%, you're like going kind of points for points with them and they don't submit you a lot, man. That's progress, but you never move from your 25%. And if you ever feel in a role like you're tightening up, like you're going fast, be conscious and go, you know what? I'm going to dial it back down. No way. No way. If you try to pull through a pass, for example, but they're resisting and you can't go and you're like, I know I could get this if I pushed it to 50. Don't get it. Switch tactics or move your body around to get the pass on slickness alone. It is a learned skill that takes forever to do. I'm not even remotely perfect at it, but I know it's the thing that we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, well said, man. Well said. Reminds me of that old classica Hibero book, Jiu-Jitsu University. I remember reading that back when I was much younger, and a lot of it is old technology. I don't know if I haven't revisited it in a long time. I don't know how much of it stands up, but one thing I do remember him talking about was looking at jiu-jitsu as kind of this hierarchy of skills that you need to develop. So, and he actually kind of color-coded them by belts, which is not really the perfect metaphor because you are learning all of these things kind of at the same time. But the idea was the foundation thing is you've got to know how to survive. And then from there, you've got to know how to escape. And then from there, you've got to know how to sweep or reverse. From there, you've got to know how to improve your position. And from there, you can start thinking about submission. And in reality, again, all of these things kind of mix together. So it's not really quite a clear progression like that. But I think there is wisdom in looking at jiu-jitsu in that way. It is very easy when you're early on to get a lot of false positives because especially if you're athletic or much bigger or stronger than the other person, you can get a lot of taps just by muscling your way through things or using the attributes that you've got. And that, again, can give you false positives because you feel like, well, I'm tapping people in the gym. I must be good at jiu-jitsu. Meanwhile, while you're kind of doing these things that have significant technical deficiencies, everyone else, they might be working on their survival or their escapes or their reversals. So even if it looks to the untrained eye like they're getting their ass handed to them, they're actually getting better because they're working on realistic skills that will help them improve. And over time, those people often tend to surpass the meatheads, right? If someone is only thinking about how do I tap this person in front of me, that probably means they're not putting a lot of thought into how do I work the deficiencies in my game. And so the trajectory eventually, you're going to overtake those people. There's going to be an inflection point where one day, and it varies a lot from person to person, but I remember when I got to brown belt around that time, I'd spent a lot of my time trying to figure out how do I deal with people bigger and stronger than me. And I tailored my training around that. And I got to the point where I realized I feel pretty good about this. You can put me in there with someone who outweighs me by 100 pounds. And of course, they've got a size advantage and I got to deal with that. And of course, that's going to be a problem if they're also a brown or black belt. But I feel like I got a chance. I feel like I can do the jiu-jitsu I want to do. I feel like their size is not going to block me from doing that. And so I always encourage people, especially earlier on in their journey, to focus on those things. If you're doing all or nothing jiu-jitsu, where either you get that arm bar right away or you fail and then they pass you and then they just beat the shit out of you for 5 minutes. If that's happening to you where the outcome of the match is like rolling a dice, that's not good. That's an indication that you need to maybe stop trying to end the fight right away and try to figure out why is it that I'm getting my guard passed so easily? Why is it that I'm getting just pancaked on bottom side control, dealing with those and then kind of working your way up to trying to figure out how to finish the fight, I think is pretty helpful.
I think it's super helpful. Real quick, on the offensive training side, training defense is a whole other different discussion, a shorter discussion, but nonetheless a discussion. On the offensive training side, what is core to understand and to kind of underline in what you just said, I think, is actually your goal every single roll is for rapid submission, period. The intensity you apply determines how successful you are against any given opponent. And you're going to get not maybe most of your good training, but incredible training. I would say maybe even most of your best training when you can dial your intensity such that in order for you to be successful in getting to the submission and securing it, you are on a roughly 50-50 fight with that person, and it takes a while. And because you're going to win that fight, you got to dial up your slickness and your technique. And so every roll is neck and neck, but only because you're only trying muscularly and speed-wise hard enough to receive all of their obstacles and overcome them. That's how your black belt can take a blue belt and get unreal training effect out of them. Because like if you're super slick and you practice on people and you submit them in 30 seconds and you get up and slap hands and do it again, that's dope and all. That's not the look you're going to get at in most cases from other black belts. They're going to just shut you out of the first takedown. You're going to be like, fuck, this usually goes better for me. But if you intentionally cap, especially your strength, what can happen is a good blue belt can get real defensive with you. And then you're like, okay, how do I work out of this position? Okay, I have options. I can go harder. Nope, not an option. I got to actually be better at jiu-jitsu. Just to put this a fine point on this example, the reason that works really well is it's really good to anchor your frame as I want to win, because fundamentally that is the only single purpose and goal of jiu-jitsu is submitting people, period. And so if you never change your North Star, but you accept all of the difficulties to it based on your own decided intensity, you're always getting the highest quality training. Just to put an example to this, I'm going to talk some shit. And honestly, this guy's been up my ass for long enough, so good, I'll do some beef. My coach, Josh Vogel, is roughly the same height as me, just a little bit taller. But I think I have like 80 pounds of muscle on him and like infinity more strength. I think I passed his guard when he was trying once ever. How? Is it that he's fast? No, his nickname is the Sloth. You see everything coming, you just can't do anything about it because he already positioned your leg outside of where you can control it. And you're like, fuck, this is going to happen to me. Is he strong? God, no. Like he's strong for an adult man, but like there's levels to this, like I've squatted 500 for reps. Like it's just kind of a different level of strength. Why the hell is he beating me? Because he knows how to move his body in that vector space. He knows exactly where he's going. He's got GPS and I'm fucking out here reading MapQuest or some shit like that, looking through fucking sheets of maps. So if you put his brain into my body, oh my God, dude, he'd be like fighting crime or some shit like that. How do we get to be as good as Josh Vogel? We have to make sure that we are not just rushing through things and using our strength a ton and even using our speed a ton. And that when we roll with people, not all the time, but many of the times, we scale our intensity down to them. The goal is the same, to beat them at jiu-jitsu. But if we scale our intensity properly, either they beat us, and because you go, even my 25% intensity, my arsenal of technique is not good enough to win, plain and simple. No big deal, but you got a lot of looks about where your body should be. And next time you might be able to like lose less and go up that spectrum, the Hibero spectrum, right? But at the end of the day, if you match them or basically match your intensity to whatever it is you want and focus on the technique, that is what's going to get you to train best in the long run. Is that emotionally satisfying? No, it's not as emotionally satisfying. Just beating the dog shit out of people is emotionally satisfying. What is going to make you better in the long run? Yeah, it's that. And so you got to think of what you want. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. Again, there's always a time for getting your swag going and just like stunting on white belts or stunting on blue belts, just like doing skateboarding moves on them, basically. Dope, have at it. They think it's funny, you think it's funny, it's great. But most of the time you should be challenging yourself by limiting your intensity or increasing your intensity to get the best kind of training possible. It's quote unquote cooperative, but no one's actually trying to cooperate. It's only quote unquote cooperative. It's really good training because you dial your intensity down to where everything is a challenge to you, an overcomable challenge if possible, but a challenge nonetheless. And if you can do that just through dialing intensity, you've kind of unlocked an ability to get great training on almost everybody.
Absolutely. I've realized that these days I kind of train similarly with almost everyone. I don't really struggle to get value out of roles. A common question that people often ask is, well, how do I roll with someone who's much bigger than me? I'm not getting anything out of it. Or how do I roll with someone who's much smaller? It's not a fair fight, so I'm not learning anything. And I don't have that problem anymore. I find that if I just make sure that I let them make me work, then I can get good, productive training out of almost anybody. Rob Bernanke from Island Top Team and BJJ Concepts calls this idea, he's got a game he plays called Fuck Your Jiu-Jitsu, where basically the idea is to just disrespect the other person's jiu-jitsu. Just give them stuff, right? Just walk into their A game and let them work from there and spend as much time fighting from inside that pocket, from inside a difficult position as you possibly can. I find that that mentality is very helpful regardless of who I'm against, because even, the whitest of white belts, if I let them put me in a fully locked in rear naked choke, I'm going to have to do some work to get out of it, right? So if I can find a way to help steer and not just give them stuff, but make it somewhat realistic so they still have to work, right? Because I want them to be getting value out of this too. But if I can let them get into their kind of the entry point of their funnels where they can start doing the kind of jiu-jitsu that they want to do, and then I can just basically defy them. That's a very powerful way to train. And I have found that you can get value out of almost anybody training in that way. Regardless of who I'm training against, I walk in now with pretty much the same mentality, which is I'm going to take this to the point where I've got to work. If I with a brown or a black belt and they're already making me work, cool, we can just roll. Maybe I've got some stuff I specifically want to work on, but my default intensity is probably fine. If I'm sparring with a white or a blue belt, I might be glacially slow until I kind of figure out what they're trying to do. And then I'll start trying to give them looks, right? Give them things that they can do. Maybe make it a bit easier for them to get access to the end of my lever, like my arm or my leg, just so that then they have some chance to start initiating offense and I have to defend. And it's funny, it's in a lot of ways training jiu-jitsu in the lab, in the gym. It's a lot like professional wrestling, right? I mean, yeah, it's to some extent, this is a little bit scripted because we want to guide towards an outcome of mutual gain where we both get good training and we both learn. But on the other hand, there is this element of, this is still an athletic, physical endeavor. You can get your ass kicked doing professional wrestling, even if it's supposedly fake.
That's the most hard sport in the world.
Dude, don't even get me started on this. It is a whole sport that is evolved around trying to be fake and scripted. But the problem is the audience is now clued into the fact that it's fake and scripted. So now to really make sure the audience is bought in, they have to make it as violent as possible while still being fake and scripted. It's tremendously dangerous. Of course, we don't want to bring that danger into the jiu-jitsu room, but that idea of having almost like a semi-scripted match where I'm giving you enough that you're really putting me on the back pedal. I've got to actually work. You can get great training out of small people, less experienced people, non-confident people. I love this training method against people who are still developing their jiu-jitsu confidence, because once they start to see that, okay, yeah, I mean, I'm going to get my ass kicked most of the time, but I've got something. If this black belt lets me kind of get the ball rolling, I can actually do some stuff. That gives them confidence too. And that means that they're going to come back and then one day they're going to be a black belt, hopefully. And then I can get much better training out of them too if I want to dial up the intensity. So I think it's a really great mindset to understand that, you can put yourself in the pocket. You can give them looks that will help both of you get better at jiu-jitsu. It's not always about just smashing the other person.
I would say there are two ways specifically of doing that, which I like most. Actually starting the roll and then giving them positions, I think can work, but it has a big downside. And that downside is that you are now practicing getting into bad positions. You don't want to do that, not on a fluid roll, because your neural network can't tell. And it'll just reactively put you into those positions in live training. And then you're like, oh, fuck, I'm learning wrong. For example, when you're letting someone pass your guard from standing guard, don't just lay down for them playing style and just let them pass your feet. Don't ever fucking do that. It's not a skill you want to reinforce. So there are two ways in which you can help this. One is by starting in distinct positions and then slapping hands and going. Take my back, put in a collar, go. Get into mount, on me, go. Halfway passed through my guard, go. That's a dog shit position to start from, but because you're starting there, you're not practicing getting into it. You don't want to practice getting into bad positions, not dynamically, not while you're doing jiu-jitsu. And then you say, okay, but once we start there, is it full blast to get out? Nope. Then you do intensity capping. So you're always actually trying to win. But if I say, I want you to go at literally 50% speed and 15% of your strength, 1-5, you're going to lose to almost every white belt. Why? Because they're just going to move you out of the way. But in your mind, as you adjust while they pass, for example, you're going to go, okay, which way do I adjust to re-get my guard, to reestablish my guard? After they passed, which way do I go to try to take their back off a guard entry? And even though you suck so badly at that they get to the next position and you start having to defend the next one, your mind is always in that slow, calculated, where do I go next given they're in this bad spot? You're never putting yourself into a bad position on purpose. And you're always trying to work out from it. But if you work with sufficiently less speed and sufficiently less strength than is required to overcome them, you are going to get great training because it's awesome slow training for you, reinforcing all the good patterns and only all the good patterns. And they succeed a ton because they just beat you a lot because you're never there to the fucking punch. For example, if I train with my wife on occasion and she weighs 100 pounds less than me or something like that, if she catches me in a single, I still practice turning my hips in, sagging a little bit, pushing my hips forward to sprawl, pulling my knee back. I don't do these things with enough force that she's not successful. Oftentimes she is. It's great training for her. Not only does that give her a realistic look, this is what's actually going to feel like, but I'm not putting enough force to be successful myself, but I'm always reinforcing the direction of those patterns. It's like, even if you're not driving at speed to try to race to a hospital, you still follow the rules of the road, even if you're going 30 miles an hour, because you want to really get used to following the rules of the road, and because you don't ever have any use case where you drive Grand Theft Auto style. Just the same way in jiu-jitsu, if you quote unquote let someone win or get good positions, it's never because you're letting them do it. It's because you just started in a bad position and then said go, or it's because you're just too fucking slow or too weak to stop them from advancing their game. Everybody wins this way and you lose nothing. I've spent a long time putting myself in suboptimal positions, and what I realized after a while was I'm just really good at getting into suboptimal positions. Well, why the fuck would I want to be good at that? I want to be good at, if I find myself in a suboptimal position, asking myself, what's the next best way out of here? And start moving in that direction. And if my force isn't high enough or speed isn't high enough, I won't be successful. But at least in my brain, that same pattern of ideal movement is being reinforced.
It's funny you bring that up. A friend of the show, Nick Perler from the Perler Wrestling Academy in Missouri, he's got a saying. He's a wrestling coach, and he says, you can get really good at really bad wrestling. And I think that's absolutely true. And you have to be very careful when you're training jiu-jitsu that you don't ingrain into your habits bad practices because they're convenient for training. One of those that comes up, like you said, is giving unrealistic defenses, just flopping your legs down, letting someone pass your guard.
Why would you ever do that?
Yeah.
How does that benefit anyone? It doesn't benefit them because they'll never see it ever again.
Exactly. So it's fine to have semi-scripted outcomes in a match. I mean, a lot of the time I will do the Josh McKinney designated winner thing where I might say, okay, the goal of this role is we want to help you work on your guard passing. And so we're only going to call this a win if you're able to actually pass my guard. So I'm here to collaborate with you and to help you do that, but you still have to beat me. At the end of the day, this is going to go in the direction where we are going to make sure that you're able to pass my guard, but you're going to have to work for it. I'm not going to make it easy. I might give you some openings here and there. I might kind of give you something, but at the end of the day, I am going to make you work for it. And you see this a lot in jiu-jitsu where people get so obsessive about the defensive side of things, which is understandable, that sometimes it becomes kind of part of their identity. And they look at jiu-jitsu, they look at not losing as a form of winning, right? The old Helio Gracie thing. If you don't lose, you eventually win. Well, I mean, there is some wisdom in that. I do see the value in that concept, but I would still much prefer to win if I could. And many people, because defense is such a key foundational skill in jiu-jitsu, we all have to go down that rabbit hole. We have to.
Yeah, don't worry. You'll get plenty of looks on defense one way or another.
Exactly. But if you spend all of your time trying to be that person who pulls bottom side control because you want to work your bottom side control defense, that has benefit up to a point. But at some point, you're just going to get really good at not getting tapped. And although that is important, you need to actually develop beyond that to, I want to get out of here. And at some point to just, I never even want to be here in the first place. I think many people, they kind of stop at that defense level. They get really good at defense. They can't be tapped. And they feel like I'm totally happy just being on the bottom and just defending myself the whole time. It's easy for that desire to practice one aspect of your training to become your whole training identity. And I think that can be dangerous, especially for bigger people. I have seen so many big giant people who are terrified of giving any realistic resistance against a smaller person, because since day one, they've been basically told, you are dangerous. Don't do anything. And I've said this on the podcast many times. I'm sure you can relate. I find this hilarious because all of the bad injuries I've ever had, it's never been from a 300-pounder. It's always been from some little mofo who thought they were going to try to do some shit they saw on YouTube and they like tweaked my knee or something. It's never the big guy. It's always the little guy who's trying to be like a backflip gymnast lunatic, or they're trying to do something they saw on the internet. It's never the big guy. So I think big guys especially are very prevalent to this because there is almost an anti-big guy bias in jiu-jitsu. They're always told like, don't do that. Don't know. You got to tone it down. You got to tone it down. And you wind up creating these big guys who are basically boulders. They just don't do anything because they've been trained to not do anything. I think we got to avoid that mindset. We should always be trying to push the pace of the fight.
Yes, but how quickly and how much force you put into pushing the pace will determine where that actually goes for you and where that goes for them. You always want to give everyone the best look you can, but if you dial down the speed to work on smoothness, and if you dial down the force to work on, do I really know things? Everyone benefits. That big guy thing has another, I love that. By the way, that caricature is so true. And I think another way that happens to contribute to the madness is, let's be completely honest. Big dudes will try to do some shit. They'll blow their load conditioning wise, they'll gas, and then they'll pretend that they're just going to defend from bottom side. What they're really doing is just trying not to die. And how do I know this so well? Come on, now I've done it like 100,000 times, man. That's my game right there. Matter of fact, Steve, it's quite, don't even post this podcast. It's offensive that you would call me out in this individual respect. It's just a real thing. And guys will be like, yeah, man, I'm just strategizing. Like, shut up. You just still smoke cigarettes and overeat all the time. Why don't you adjust that? And then you can have good enough cardio to do good jiu-jitsu. But yeah, to your point, when you're on bottom and you're only defending, no, you're only defending if defending is the proximate thing you have to do to not get submitted. As soon as they aren't submitting you and they're just kind of chilling in side control and plotting their next move, even if slowly, even if with minimal force, you are moving your hands and your body into the positions that need to occur for you to get out. So for example, if you're in bottom side, you had better be turning to your side. And even if you can't, because they're really good at adjusting and squishing you, every time they adjust and squish your left shoulder, you start moving to the right one and start tilting to the side. If they haven't controlled your hips better be goddamn vertical, side to side on the mat, even though your shoulders are pinned to the mat. And you got to be weaving your arms, going for, cross grips, whatever it takes to move yourself out of the equation. And if you want, it's a white belt girl and you want her to win the roll, just dial your speed and strength down so far, even with your best movements, it looks like molasses and you're the weakest person ever. You're still training absolutely the same excellent motor patterns, and she's getting great training because she's having tons of success.
Amazing, man. Well, one last question I want to ask you here. I always try to advocate for the regular people in jiu-jitsu, people who kind of do this as a casual hobby. And I bring this up because so much of the literature out there and so much of the content that people produce assumes that you are the type of person who wants to achieve maximal jiu-jitsu performance regardless of what it costs. And this is, I think, where there's a big divide in terms of the way that we present and teach jiu-jitsu versus the perceived goals of the actual student. Most people who train jiu-jitsu, the vast majority of them, they're not going to be training 5, 6, 7 days a week. They're not going to be trying to become a world champion. Most people who train jiu-jitsu are going to be, accountants in their 50s. Maybe they're a mother of 3. They've never done anything athletic in their life, and they've just decided they really like jiu-jitsu. And so the challenge that I often have when I am one of these people is that when I see content out there that tells me how to get better at jiu-jitsu or how to improve my conditioning or how to do this or how to do that, there's kind of this baked in assumption that jiu-jitsu is the only damn thing I care about in my life. And yeah, if you want to be good at jiu-jitsu, you got to spend 5 hours a day training and then another 5 hours a day buying and watching instructionals. I'm just not going to do that, right? And I'm not saying it's a bad approach. I'm just saying I have a time box in my life around how much effort I want to put into the sport. And that to me is kind of my goal. So I'd love to know for people who are maybe non-athletes, they dip their toes into this, but they love a casual relationship with jiu-jitsu. Maybe they train twice, maybe they train once a week. They're older. They don't have a lot of advantages athletically. They don't have a lot of sports experience. What would you say to these kinds of people when it comes to how to really get better at jiu-jitsu, especially as it pertains to this conversation around training intensity? Is there anything that you would encourage a kind of a less committed person to do to be more effective on the mats, as opposed to the lifer, the pro competitor who's going to be here and they're going to get good no matter what?
Yeah. I'll tell you this, a couple things. One, this is a very difficult question for me to answer because my entire career is to think exclusively at the top end margin on almost every physical endeavor. As a matter of fact, like when I got into my PhD program, the major professor there, Dr. Mike Stone, just a legend in the field, he said, don't come here if you want adult fitness or health or epidemiology. We take good athletes and make them better, and that's all we do. And I was like, God damn, that is ringing my bell. So it's tough to make the perspective shift, but I'll give at least two pieces of advice. The first, not so great piece, but it has truth, is you could qualitatively approach your game a little bit differently and your training regimen a little bit differently. Definitely there are ways to do that. I have explored that latent space almost to no extent whatsoever because I could give a flying fuck for it. Like, I don't do jiu-jitsu much, but I always want my brain on thinking of strategies for the very best. Why? Not because I think like it's competitive jiu-jitsu or die. Everyone is not doing a tournament every hour sucks. If you're not like, buying everything off of, BJJ Fanatics, you're an idiot, which by the way, great website and has amazing instructionals. So go buy stuff. But maybe like, there is absolutely like something to say for just doing jiu-jitsu is literally a hobby and, getting a little better at it. So 100%. But the reason that the champion mindset is really good to have for everyone is because fundamentally at most levels, all you're going to do is take the champion mindset and just fit it into how many hours of jiu-jitsu you can actually do per week, and then just fuck off and not think about jiu-jitsu and just go have the pasta and pizza night with your family. Like, that is really probably the best answer and my preferred answer from which to start moving around and seeing the mental models around it. So basically it's this: you train with the same principles in very, very similar methods as the pros. The pros train 30 hours a week, you train 3. That usually checks all the boxes. I mean, like, that's just it. And if you're one of these people, because there's a couple of sub-concerns, like, okay, let me re-ask that question. It's not just that I need a different way of training. It's that I play pickleball and I don't want tennis elbow after 3 months because I'm jiu-jitsuing myself to death. Got it. Then it's all about intensity modulation on your end. If you ever roll harder than 50% and you look me in the face and you say I have serious jiu-jitsu injury concerns, you're a hypocrite. Stop doing that. Roll easier and you will have a great time and you'll almost never get hurt and it'll be a lifetime sport. If you want to crank it all the time, great. And listen, a lot of this stuff, I'll render the advice. People can do with it what they will. Are there people who will roll once a week, but roll every single roll, psychotic life or death? Yeah, man. And as long as you understand the trade-offs, my man, let's get it popping. Is that the ideal way to approach it if you want a good balance with the rest of your life? Fuck no. Hell no. But seemingly that's where your spirit energy is, so I'm not going to tell you to stop. It's just about knowing how to do the thing well. Like, imagine if you were, my wife used to be like, do like track days and stuff. She drives like Subarus or whatever. And so she, didn't do it a ton, didn't do it heavily. But when she did it, she listened to the coaching and watched the videos and tried to do every maneuver like a professional race car driver would, but just at her own pace and just once every few weeks instead of for 5 hours every day and then another 5 hours in the simulator. Honestly, just frequency of training and volume of training is by far the biggest separator from folks that are just having a good time versus folks that are trying to make a real big impact to themselves for jiu-jitsu.
Nice, man. Well, thanks so much for this chat. This was fantastic. Before we tie this up, any closing thoughts or things you wanted to talk about on this topic that we didn't get to yet?
Oh, geez. Well, I don't know, 100,000 things, but there's lots of periodizations, lots of sequencing. Another really cool question in jiu-jitsu that we could talk about, maybe if this isn't the worst episode you've ever recorded, and then I email you 3 months later and you're like, Mike, honestly, I need to eat, so I can't afford to have you on again because literally no one clicks on these things. Maybe something down the line to discuss is how to develop a game plan for jiu-jitsu. Because, and I'll give a hint to this, and I already did earlier, game plans are instrumental. You can't organically rediscover all of jiu-jitsu by yourself and be the best at everything. If someone's like, hey, what's kind of your go-to offense? You need 2 things: moves you're really good at and an ability to sequence those moves from a typical starting position to a typical finishing position. And so if you don't have either one of those 2 things, either you have some really awesome moves that you do, but there's no sequence and no transitions, you're not thinking this through. And the other one is, if you don't have any go-to moves because you decided you were going to be good at everything, and so someone's like, what's your favorite go-to submission from closed guard? And you're like, oh, armbar, oh, crossbody armbar, triangle, oh, I'm messing with this big guy triangle and I have wrist locks and blah 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 blah, and you just keep going. And it's like, okay, so you have never trained any of these things in a high enough volume to get beyond blue belt level in them. There is a concept in just overall science of defense and game theory called like the concept of a salient. It's when two armies are fighting and they're pushed up against each other on the front line and no one has an advantage. The way you make breakthroughs is you group your forces in one specific area, locally overwhelm, and drive a big distance through the enemy line, because you put your best foot forward in just one place. And unless they catch your intel early and meet you with equal big defense, they're late to the game. You crush through their defensive line. The identical, by the way, analogy, really almost a homology of passing guard. And that's how you win. And so sometimes what people do is they can become pretty decent at every move. And then when they're a blue belt, they go up against a good purple belt. They literally cannot score, because defense by game theoretic definition, and that's how it plays out in real life, is it like 3 to 10, depending on the situation, times easier than offense. And so if you don't have any moves that you're really grooved in, they're your fucking moves and you're goddamn good at them, you're just pretty decent at everything. And if you don't have a sequence between those moves, you are not understanding the situation properly. Almost every of one of the best grapplers has very slick sequences between moves that are real goddamn good at. They're going to get you in those moves. And so if you train your jiu-jitsu more specifically than not, especially as you get better, especially if you want to compete, that is going to just make you better at the sport, versus if you just like do a move of the week. I know we're going to both bitch at each other for forever about this, but like, you know, like the kind of gym you go to where every day they're learning something new because like a different brown belt instructor showed up and there's no connection to anything else. And like, oh, like I know like 80 moves in jiu-jitsu. I know 0 of them good enough to pull them off against anyone who's not dead. You functionally know essentially nothing. You are combat ineffective. Now, if you drill the same damn move sequence about 800 times and then introduce it into moderate training and then hard training, nobody gives a shit if you always double leg people, pass their guard, take their back, and submit them cross collar choke. You're just going to get it done. And you're going to be blue belt masters world champ after that shit. And they're going to be like, yeah, but that guy just does one thing. So what, pussy? Stop him then. Like, well, I want like a more eclectic game. For what? For highlight reels? And listen, for spirit energy, you want to be able to be amazing in a bunch of different moves. Fucking rock on. If you want to be the best competitor you can be, you're going to realize that you have to have a sequence and you have to train it over and over, and you have to make that sequence have your best go-to 2 or 3 moves. Period. You could know like 18 total moves in jiu-jitsu and be a world champion. If you know 100 moves, but you know them all at a blue belt level, you ain't going to black belt worlds. I mean, you can sign up and get shat out the first fucking bracket, but that's the best you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you want to learn hundreds of moves in jiu-jitsu, that's probably a career path that's better suited towards being a YouTuber than being a world champion.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree with you completely. This is something, I mean, the other martial arts have learned this. In judo, this is a concept they call takuiwaza, the idea that you've got signature moves out of all of the moves in the judo canon, all of the throws you could use. Most of these judoka, they really only are especially proficient at 2 or 3, and those are the ones that they really use. Jiu-jitsu is the only martial art I've seen where you're expected to be almost like a collector of techniques, and we look positively on people who know more, whereas realistically, like you said, the best grapplers, you really only need a very small handful of things. It can be boring, but I mean, I think anyone who's watched jiu-jitsu competition would agree it normally is boring, right? The goal is predictability of outcome. I want to win this fight, and sometimes the best way to be predictable is to have a really, really well-grooved path that you can just execute on, and you've trained it enough that no matter what the other person does, you can get back on track and get to that path. And I mean, if you want to come back and talk about game planning, I would love to have that conversation with you, because, you know, I was asking my Discord, and they said, I told them, you know, we're going to be talking to Dr. Mike. What do you want to ask? And
let me guess, they asked about protein or some shit like that.
No. I was going to say they wanted to know, at what point did you decide on your personal journey to stop worrying about being good at jiu-jitsu and focus more on being big at jiu-jitsu? That was what they wanted to know.
Are you serious? Do they really say that?
No. I just told them I would troll you.
Oh my God. Trolling received, sir. Good guy was like, big at jiu-jitsu, but I have a bodyweight problem. I can't stop eating. Everyone knows this. This is just embarrassing at this point. Yeah, listen, Steve, if you want to do that, do you ever do 3-way podcasts, or are you not deviant enough for it?
I do 3-way podcasts.
My God, how absurd. I would love to have some future podcasts with you in which I bring on one of 2 people alongside with me. One, especially for that sequencing convo and game plan convo, is actually the person I learned game plans from. and that's Josh Vogel, my
friend of the show.
Professor. Yes. I mean, he's not really friends with anyone. He's kind of a fucking weirdo, but
well, I mean, like, this is jiu-jitsu, right? Everyone's a fucking weirdo. He's about as friendly as I found.
No, 100% preach. All jokes, all love. Josh knows I'm kidding. Or he doesn't. He's going to break my fucking arm next time he sees me, as I'm powerless against him. But I would love to get him into the discussion on game plans, because like, boy, oh boy, like, can him and I like put our heads together and really wrap a good game about that. And then another person I'd love to introduce you to, and this could be your own podcast if you wanted, or if you would want him on with me, is my local coach, Mr. Will Starks, Pro MMA, brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and boys, he's smart, and boys, he thought it through, and he has actually like a theoretical framework for all combat sport, like space development. Like, he's sharp and thinks about this day and night. It's his profession, and he would be an excellent addition to the show, because look, if you want nerdy, brainy shit, some mental models type of shit, boy, do we have dump trucks of that for you, my friend.
Nice. I love the nerdy shit. Well, let's set that up, man. I am excited. But in the interim, you're an easy guy to find. You're very well known, especially on the YouTube space, man. If people want to check out your content, how can they go about doing that?
I just say, just don't even bother. I mean, like, I've had my run. And it hasn't been fun, If people call it the time in the sun or 15 minutes of fame, I just call it like a disaster, like most of the rest of my life. But if that wasn't convincing and you still insist, then just go to RP Strength. Just type that into YouTube search. My giant head will come up. You can type in Dr. Mike. If you type in Dr.Mike, then you will find either one of two people, a profoundly good-looking actual medical doctor, that ain't me, or a person who looks like a Triceratops in an M1 Abrams tank had sex, and that's what ended up happening to their head. So that's me. That's probably the best way to find me. If you just Google me and Google podcast or anything like that, like, I've just yapped way too much, so that you're never going to be at a loss for that shit. And yeah, that's how you find me. But man, I got to tell you, this discussion was super, super awesome. It was super fun. You're an amazing host at this. And honestly, like, you just have a really soothing voice. And I feel like I'm kind of one of those early 90s smooth jazz radio shows. And I called in to like complain about my breakup, but you really kind of cheered me up with that soothing voice, Steve.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You know what? I've never been told I have a soothing voice, but fuck, I'll take it. I'll take anything these days. Hello. Tell you what, I will put those links in the show notes. I definitely recommend people give Mike a follow if you haven't already. I mean, I know I always tell people this, but Mike, you're very popular in my household. My wife is a molecular biologist. She is a huge fan of your YouTube channel as someone who works in fitness and the sciences. So she was actually very excited that I got a chance to chat with you. She's going to love this episode. I definitely recommend for anyone out there who wants an intelligent look into sports science and nutrition, check out Mike. I mean, Lord knows there's a lot of dumbasses on YouTube, and one of the big problems is separating good information from bad. And so if you are looking for good, reliable, smart people to tell you what, about sports and nutrition, Mike, your stuff is some of the best that's out there. So I will put a link to all of that in the show notes.
Thank you so much. I just have to do the announcement here. Folks, at least at first, and probably ever, do not turn me on around your children. I will say the darndest things. Actually, your children and others that you, like other adults that you aspire to have esteem around. Like, if your boss is at work and he lets you listen to podcasts while you do your work, don't turn me on around your boss. I'm going to say something audacious and he's going to be like, what kind of degeneracy is this? You're fired. So yeah, just a heads up. I do swear quite a bit, and I haven't gone on too many tangents with preposterous jokes in scenarios that thank God never happened, but it's typically my style. So heads up, people, you're in for something.
People often tell me that they listen to BJJ mental models with their kids, and I always think, man, I don't know what that says about you as a parent, because I wouldn't want to listen to
kids. You're going to hear a lot of shit. I love it.
Amazing, man. Well, like I said, I'll put links to all of your stuff in the show notes, also to our stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. We've got tons of episodes of the podcast. So if you like this style of jiu-jitsu education, there's a lot of it there completely free. We also have mini episodes that break down some of the key concepts that we talk about on the show if you're looking for a quick way to catch up. And our newsletter is growing like crazy, so I recommend signing up to that too. That's all on the website. And of course, if you want to go to the next level with us, BJJ Mental Models Premium is the way that you do that. We offer the world's biggest library of jiu-jitsu audio courses on concept, strategy, tactics.
Cool.
It is pretty cool stuff. We got a lot of like heavy hitters who have made courses on our platform. The way I like to think of it is if you like Audible or you like Masterclass, you're probably going to like BJJ Mental Models Premium. We also do live coaching too remotely. We've got some amazing coaches. I mean, Brianna St. Marie is one of our coaches. So if you want to have the IBJJF Queen give you direct feedback, sign up for BJJ Mental Models Premium. There's a bunch of other stuff there, but I will save the rest of the plugs for later. You can get everything we make at bjjmentalmodels.com. But Dr. Mike, thanks so much, man. I am excited. This is a good one. I love this conversation. I've been looking forward to picking your brain on this for a long time. I learned a lot, so I hope that the listeners found the same. Thanks so much for coming by. And yeah, I would love to hit you up on that offer to talk about game planning in the future.
You got it, dude. Thank you so much for having me on.
Most welcome, sir. Thank you to the listeners as well. We'll talk to you next time. See you then. Take care.